When rancher Mason Hartwell heard breathing in his barn at 3 a.m., he expected a trespasser or maybe a wounded animal, but nothing could have prepared him for the teenage girl wrapped in deerskin, clutching a leather pouch like her life depended on it. By sunrise, his entire property was encircled by over 100 wild horses, and the girl whispered 4 words that made his blood run cold. "They came for me." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mason Hartwell had owned the Double H Ranch in rural Montana for 32 years, and in all that time, he'd seen plenty of strange things. Coyotes bold enough to stroll past his porch at noon, lightning strikes that turned fence posts to charcoal, even a black bear that somehow got itself stuck in his grain silo. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever made him grab his shotgun and question his own sanity quite like the sound he heard that October night. It was 3:17 a.m. when Mason's eyes snapped open. The autumn wind rattled his bedroom window, carrying with it the smell of frost and dying grass. He'd been dreaming about his late wife, Sarah, the way he often did when the temperature dropped. But something had pulled him from that dream. A sound, not the usual creaking of old wood or the distant howl of coyotes. This was different. Breathing, human breathing. Mason sat up slowly, his joints protesting after 68 years of hard ranch work. His German shepherd, Duke, normally slept at the foot of his bed, but tonight the dog was gone. That alone set off alarm bells. Duke never left his side at night unless something was seriously wrong. He pulled on his jeans and boots, grabbed the shotgun from beside his dresser, and crept down the stairs. The house was dark except for the moonlight streaming through the kitchen windows. Still no sign of Duke. Mason's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the back door. Through the window, he could see his barn about 50 yards away. The door was slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. That door had been closed. He'd checked it himself before bed, same as he had every night for 3 decades. Mason stepped outside into the cold Montana night. The moon was nearly full, casting long shadows across his property. He could see his breath in silver clouds as he moved toward the barn, shotgun raised, finger near the trigger. Every instinct screamed at him to call Sheriff Brooks, but something held him back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just the stubborn independence that came from living alone on 400 acres of land. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open wider. The familiar smells hit him immediately: hay, leather, horse manure, motor oil from his tractor. But there was something else too, something earthy and wild like pine needles and smoke. "Who's in here?" Mason's voice came out rougher than he intended. "I'm armed and I know how to use this thing." Silence. Then from the corner near the old hay bales, a soft whimper. Not Duke, something else. Mason's hand found the light switch, and the barn flooded with harsh fluorescent light. What he saw made him lower his shotgun in pure confusion. A girl. Couldn't have been more than 17 or 18 years old. She was curled up in the corner, wrapped in what looked like deerskin clothing, decorated with intricate beadwork. Her long black hair was matted with leaves and dirt, and her face was streaked with tears and scratches. In her arms, she clutched a leather pouch against her chest, like it contained her very soul. Her dark eyes were wide with terror, but there was something else there too. Desperation, determination, and sitting right beside her, tail wagging like they were old friends, was Duke. "What in the hell?" Mason started, but the girl flinched violently. Pressing herself harder against the wall, he lowered the shotgun completely, propping it against a workbench. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you." He raised his hand slowly, the way he would with a spooked horse. "What are you doing in my barn?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him with those haunted eyes, her breathing quick and shallow. Mason could see now that she was shivering, though whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. Her deerskin clothing was torn in places, revealing scratches and bruises on her arms and legs. She'd been running, hard and fast by the looks of it. "You hurt?" Mason asked, taking a careful step closer. "Do you need a doctor?" Still nothing. But her eyes darted to the barn door, then back to him, then to the door again. She was calculating, deciding whether to bolt. "Look," Mason said, softening his voice, the way Sarah used to when dealing with frightened animals. "It's colder than a witch's. It's freezing out there. You're clearly in some kind of trouble. At least let me get you a blanket and something warm to drink." The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, barely above a whisper, "They're coming." Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Who's coming?" "The horses." Her accent was strange, her words carefully chosen. "They always come at dawn." "They're looking for me." Mason glanced at his watch. 3:42 a.m. Sunrise was still a couple hours away. "Horses? What horses?" "Girl, you're not making any sense." But before she could answer, Duke's ears perked up. The dog's head swiveled toward the barn door, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Mason had owned Duke for 7 years, and he'd never heard that particular sound before. It wasn't the aggressive growl he used with coyotes, or the warning growl for strangers. This was different, uncertain, almost fearful. "They're here early," the girl whispered, and for the first time, Mason saw something in her expression that scared him more than any intruder or wild animal ever could. She looked resigned, like she'd been expecting this, like she'd been running from it her whole life. Outside, carried on the wind, came a sound that made the hair on Mason's neck stand straight up. Hoofbeats, dozens of them, maybe more. Growing closer by the second, the girl clutched her leather pouch tighter and closed her eyes. "I'm sorry I brought them here." "I'm so sorry." Mason moved to the barn door and peered out into the darkness. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Horses everywhere, emerging from the tree line like ghosts, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. Wild horses from the looks of them, with shaggy coats and untamed manes. They moved in complete silence now, surrounding his property in a perfect circle. 20, 40, 60. Mason stopped counting, and they were all staring directly at his barn, at the girl. "What the hell is happening?" Mason breathed, but he already knew that whatever explanation she gave him, his quiet life on the Double H ranch was about to change forever. The girl stood up slowly, her legs shaky, and walked toward the door. Mason instinctively moved to block her path. "Don't," she said simply. "If I don't go to them, they'll come in. And trust me, you don't want that. Who are you?" Mason demanded. "What are those horses? Why are they here?" The girl looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw centuries of stories he couldn't begin to understand. "My name is Ayana. And those horses," she paused, glancing out at the growing herd. "They're my family's burden, a debt that's been owed for 7 generations. And tonight it comes due." Mason stood frozen, trying to process what he was hearing. None of it made sense. But the horses, at least 100 of them now, were real enough. And they were waiting. "What kind of debt?" he asked. Ayana's grip on the leather pouch tightened. "The kind that requires blood." Mason had faced down grizzly bears, broken wild stallions, and survived a barn fire that nearly took his left arm. But standing in that doorway, watching 100 wild horses form a perfect circle around his ranch, he felt genuine fear for the first time in decades. "Blood," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "What are you talking about?" Ayana didn't move toward the door anymore. Instead, she sank down onto a hay bale, exhaustion finally overtaking her. The leather pouch remained clutched against her chest, and Mason noticed her knuckles were white from gripping it so hard. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said quietly. "White people never do. Try me." Mason grabbed an old horse blanket from a shelf and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at the gesture but didn't pull away. "I just watched 100 horses appear out of nowhere and surround my property like they're following orders. My threshold for disbelief is pretty damn high right now." A ghost of a smile crossed Ayana's face, but it vanished quickly. Outside, the horses remained motionless, their breath creating clouds of mist in the cold air. Duke had stopped growling but stayed close to Mason's leg, his body tense. "My great-great-great-great-grandmother was named Huyana," Ayana began, her voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting a story told many times before. "She was a medicine woman of the Absolute people. Your history books call us the Crow. back in 1876 during the wars with the cavalry. She made a choice that saved her village, but cursed her bloodline. Mason pulled up a wooden stool and sat down, keeping one eye on the barn door. The horses hadn't moved, but their presence pressed against his consciousness like a physical weight. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cavalry had surrounded our winter camp, Ayana continued. 300 soldiers against maybe 100 warriors, plus women, children, and elders. They wanted our land, our horses, everything. The commanding officer gave us until dawn to surrender or die. She paused, her fingers tracing the beadwork on the leather pouch. But Huyana knew a secret. She knew how to speak to horses. Not just communicate, actually speak their language, understand their spirits. That's impossible, Mason said automatically, then caught himself. Sorry, keep going. She went out alone that night, walked right past the cavalry sentries like a ghost, found their horses, over 400 of them hobbled and corralled. And she made them an offer. Ayana's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She offered her blood, her family's blood. 7 generations worth. In exchange, the horses would revolt at dawn, scatter the cavalry, give her people time to escape. Mason felt his skepticism warring with the evidence of his own eyes. Those horses outside weren't natural. The way they moved, the way they waited, it was coordinated, intelligent. The horses accepted, he asked. They did more than accept. They were ecstatic. Ayana's laugh was bitter. You have to understand, horses have been enslaved by humans for thousands of years. Bridled, broken, beaten. They jumped at the chance for revenge, even temporary revenge. But the spirits that govern these things, the old powers, they demanded balance, blood for freedom, a debt that would echo through generations. So what happened at dawn? Exactly what Huyana promised. The horses went wild. Threw their riders, trampled tents, destroyed supplies. The cavalry scattered, and my people escaped into the Bighorn Mountains. Huyana saved hundreds of lives that day. Ayana's expression darkened. But every generation since has paid the price. Mason leaned forward. What price? The firstborn daughter of Huyana's bloodline must give herself to the horses when she turns 18. She must join their herd, run with them, become one of them. Her human life ends. The debt gets paid for another generation. Ayana's voice cracked. My mother was an only child. She gave herself to the horses 23 years ago. I never knew her. My grandmother raised me, told me the stories, and prepared me for my fate. The weight of it settled over the barn like a shroud. Mason thought of his own daughter, Rebecca, safe in Seattle, with her tech job and her fiancé. He couldn't imagine sacrificing her to some ancient curse. That's barbaric, he said. There has to be another way. You think we haven't tried? Ayana's eyes flashed with anger for the first time. My grandmother spent 60 years researching, consulting elders, traveling to every medicine person she could find. Nothing. The debt is blood-bound. It can't be broken, only paid. What's in the pouch? Mason nodded toward the leather bag she still clutched. Ayana hesitated, then slowly loosened her grip. This belonged to Huyana. It's been passed down through my family. Inside are the things she carried that night. Sage, tobacco, a lock of her hair, and the words. The exact words she spoke to the horses to seal the bargain. Why'd you run? The question came out harsher than Mason intended. If the debt has to be paid, why are you hiding in my barn? Ayana's jaw tightened. Because I'm a coward. Because I'm 18 years and 3 months old, and I've been running for 3 months. Because every time I close my eyes, I see my mother's face in my dreams, and she's trapped. Half human, half horse, neither one thing nor the other, running forever with a herd that never stops moving. That's what happens to us. We don't just die. We transform. We lose ourselves piece by piece, until there's nothing left but instinct and rage. Tears streamed down her face now, and she didn't bother wiping them away. I thought if I ran far enough, hid well enough, maybe the curse would skip me. Maybe it would move to the next generation. But the horses always find us. They found my aunt when she tried to hide in Canada. They found my great-grandmother when she fled to Mexico. Geography means nothing to them. The debt will be paid. Mason stood up and walked to the barn door. The horses remained in their circle, at least 150 of them now. More kept emerging from the darkness, silent as shadows. Their eyes gleamed with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Dawn. That's when the transformation happens. When the sun breaks the horizon, if I'm anywhere near the herd, the curse activates. My body will change, my mind will fragment, and I'll run with them until there's nothing human left." Ayana checked her phone. The battery was nearly dead, but the time showed 4:23 a.m. Less than 90 minutes. Mason's mind raced. Every logical bone in his body screamed that this was insane, that curses weren't real, that there had to be a rational explanation. But he'd been a rancher his whole life. He knew horses, and the creatures circling his property weren't acting like any horses he'd ever seen. "There's got to be something we can do," he muttered. "Some loophole, some exception." "There isn't." Ayana's voice was hollow. "Trust me, my family has looked. What if you gave them something else? Not blood, but something equally valuable." Mason was grasping at straws now, but he couldn't just stand by and watch a teenager get consumed by a curse. Like what? Money? Land? Ayana shook her head. "The spirits don't care about human possessions. They deal in essence. Life force, blood. What about animal blood? You said Huyana was a medicine woman. Could she have meant the blood of horses?" "We tried that. My grandmother sacrificed 3 horses in a ritual when I was 16. The herd came anyway. They trampled the bodies and waited for me. Whatever Huyana promised, it specifically means human blood." "Her blood." "My blood." Mason paced the barn, his boots kicking up dust. "Think, old man, think. There had to be an angle they were missing. Sarah would have known what to do. She'd always been the clever one, able to see solutions where he only saw problems. Then something occurred to him. You said firstborn daughter, right? What if you weren't the firstborn anymore?" Ayana looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "That's not how biology works." "No, but hear me out. Adoption. What if I legally adopted you right now, made you my daughter? You'd still be Huyana's descendant, but you'd also be mine. Would that confuse the curse? Give us leverage to renegotiate?" For a moment, hope flickered in Ayana's eyes. Then it died. "The curse follows bloodlines, not legal documents. It doesn't matter whose last name I carry. Damn it!" Mason slammed his fist against a support beam, making Duke jump. "There has to be something." "There is," Ayana said quietly. "I can accept my fate. I can walk out there, spare you and your property, and pay the debt my ancestor promised. At least then my grandmother won't have to watch another generation run from the inevitable." "No." Mason's voice was firm. "I don't accept that. I've lived 68 years on this earth, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that every problem has a solution. We just have to find it. We have less than 80 minutes. Then we better think fast." Mason grabbed his phone and started scrolling through contacts. "I know someone. Expert on Native American history, works at the university in Billings. If anyone knows about breaking curses, it's 4:30 in the morning," Ayana pointed out. "They won't answer. She will. She owes me a favor." Mason hit the call button. Outside, one of the horses suddenly reared up on its hind legs and let out a piercing whinny that shattered the night silence. The other horses responded in kind, creating a cacophony that echoed across the ranch. Then, as abruptly as it started, the noise stopped. The circle was tightening. Ayana stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "They're getting impatient. When they start making noise, it means they're preparing for the transformation. We're running out of time faster than I thought." Mason's phone rang and rang. Finally, a groggy voice answered. "This better be life or death, Mason." "It is, Dr. Patricia Winters. I need everything you know about breaking blood curses. Right now." There was a pause. "Are you drunk?" "Stone sober and running out of time. There's a girl in my barn who's about to be consumed by a 150-year-old curse involving horses and blood debt. I need solutions, not skepticism." Another pause, longer this time. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was serious. "Send me a photo of anything related to the curse. Text, artifacts, anything. I'll see what I can find." Mason looked at Ayana. "The pouch. Can I photograph what's inside? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. At this point, what do we have to lose? As Mason prepared to document the contents of Huyana's sacred pouch, neither of them noticed Duke's ears perking up again. Neither of them saw the horses beginning to move closer, their circle tightening like a noose, and neither of them could have known that the solution to breaking the curse was already inside that barn. Hidden in plain sight for over a century, dawn was coming, and with it, a choice that would change everything. Mason's hands trembled slightly as Ayana untied the leather straps securing the ancient pouch. He'd photographed plenty of things in his life, livestock for insurance, property damage for claims, but this felt different, sacred, dangerous even. Be careful, Ayana warned. These items have been touched by 7 generations of women who knew they were going to die. That kind of grief leaves an imprint. The first item she pulled out was a bundle of sage, dried and brittle with age, but still fragrant. Mason snapped a photo and texted it to Patricia. Next came a small clay pipe, its bowl stained dark with tobacco residue from over a century ago. Then Ayana withdrew a lock of hair, tied with sinew and surprisingly well preserved. Ayana's, she whispered. Cut the night before she made the bargain. Mason photographed it, his phone's flash illuminating the strands, black mixed with premature grey. He wondered what Huyana had looked like, this woman who'd saved her people but damned her daughters. There's one more thing, Ayana said, pulling out a piece of folded birch bark. The words she spoke. Written in her own hand, she unfolded it carefully and Mason's breath caught. The bark was covered in symbols he didn't recognize. Some looked like pictographs, others like flowing script. At the bottom, someone had added a translation in English, the handwriting different, more modern. Mason photographed both sides, zooming in to capture every detail, and sent them to Patricia. His phone showed 4:47 a.m. Sunrise was at 6:02 a.m. They had 1 hour and 15 minutes. Got them. Patricia's text came through. Give me 10 minutes. This is... Jesus, Mason, where did you find this? Long story. We don't have 10 minutes. Then you definitely don't have time for me to be wrong. 10 minutes. Stay put. Mason looked up at Ayana. She needs 10 minutes. The horses won't wait that long. Ayana moved to the window. The herd had closed to within 30 feet of the barn. Their eyes reflected the barn's fluorescent lights, creating an eerie constellation of green and gold. They know dawn is coming. They can feel it. Duke whined and pressed against Mason's leg. The dog had been remarkably calm, considering the circumstances. But even his canine courage had limits. Tell me more about the transformation, Mason said. Partly to distract Ayana, and partly because he needed to understand what they were fighting. You said your mother became half human, half horse. What does that actually mean? Ayana's face contorted with pain. My grandmother told me once, right before she died. She said my mother's last moments as fully human were the worst. She walked out to meet the herd at dawn, and as the sun touched the horizon, her legs began to change first. The bones elongated, reshaped themselves. Hooves burst through her feet. She tried to scream, but her voice was already changing, becoming a whinny, a neigh. Her face stretched forward. Her teeth grew flat and wide. Hair sprouted across her body. Mason felt his stomach turn. How long did it take? Hours. The transformation isn't instant. It's gradual, agonizing. And the worst part is that you're conscious through all of it. You feel your humanity slipping away piece by piece. Your thoughts become simpler, more instinctual. Your memories fade. By the end, you're running with the herd, and you can't remember why you're running or what you used to be. You just know you have to keep moving, forever. That's not a debt, Mason said angrily. That's torture. That's revenge, Ayana corrected. The horses aren't interested in fairness. They want what was taken from them, freedom, autonomy, wild nature, and they get it by taking it from us. Each woman who joins the herd adds to their power, makes them stronger, more connected to the spirit world. Mason's phone buzzed. Patricia. Okay. I've translated the words as best I can. The curse is structured like a contract, very specific language, lots of conditions. That's good news because contracts can have loopholes. What's the loophole? Mason typed back frantically. Still looking. But I found something interesting. The phrase Huyana used translates roughly to blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. It's a specific invocation of matrilineal descent. Very precise. English, Patricia. We have less than an hour. It means the curse only follows the maternal line, daughters. But here's the thing. It also says, until the debt is satisfied by willing surrender of the seventh daughter of the seventh daughter. Ayana is that seventh daughter, right? Mason looked at Ayana. You're the seventh in the line from Huyana? She nodded. My mother was the sixth. I'm the seventh. He relayed this to Patricia. Then this is the final payment. If Ayana completes the transformation, the debt is fully paid. The curse ends. But if she doesn't, what? What happens if she doesn't? The curse extends to the 8th generation. Her children, her grandchildren. It keeps going until the 7th daughter of the 7th daughter finally pays. Mason looked at Ayana with new understanding. You're not just running from your own fate. You're trying to pass it to your kids. I don't have kids. Ayana's voice cracked. I'm 18. I've never even had a serious boyfriend. But yes, that's what my running means. If I survive tonight, any daughter I ever have will carry this curse. And if I never have daughters, it passes to my cousins, their daughters. The curse won't end until it gets what it was promised. So what are our options? Mason demanded, both speaking to Ayana and typing to Patricia. Patricia's response came quickly. 3 possibilities, none of them great. When Ayana completes the transformation willingly and ends the curse forever. 2, she keeps running, passing the burden forward. 3, find a way to substitute another payment that satisfies the original terms of the bargain. What kind of payment? That's where it gets tricky. The horses demanded blood, specifically human blood tied to Huyana's lineage. But the birch bark shows something else. There's a phrase at the bottom, separate from the main curse. It's faded, hard to read, but it looks like an amendment or addition. Can you send me a higher resolution photo of just that section? Mason zoomed in on the bottom corner of the birch bark, where the symbols were indeed fainter. He took several photos with flash from different angles and sent them all. Outside, one of the horses screamed, a sound that made every hair on Mason's body stand up. It wasn't a normal horse sound. It was something else. Something that carried rage and hunger and anticipation. They're excited, Ayana whispered. They can taste the dawn. Feel it approaching. Duke's whine turned into a low growl. The dog was staring at the barn door, hackles raised. Something was changing. Mason's phone rang. Patricia, voice urgent. Mason, I think I found it. This amendment, it's a failsafe. Huyana must have added it later, maybe when she realized what she'd done to her descendants. What does it say? It's in the old language, but the best translation I can give is, should the daughter of my line wish to break free, let her prove the horse's freedom was already won. Show them the open gate they never saw. Return what was stolen without them knowing it was returned. That's a riddle, Mason said, frustration mounting. We don't have time for riddles. It's not just a riddle, it's instructions. Huyana is saying there's a way to prove to the horses that they already got their freedom back, that the debt is already paid. You have to show them evidence that contradicts their reason for existing. Ayana had been listening intently. The open gate they never saw, she repeated. What does that mean? Patricia continued, think about it. Huyana promised the horses freedom in exchange for her bloodline. But horses in America, wild mustangs, they already got their freedom back. There are tens of thousands of wild horses across the West now, protected by federal law. The horses don't know this because these spirit horses have been locked in the curse, frozen in time, unable to see that the world changed. Mason felt a spark of understanding. So, if we can prove to them that horses are free, that they won the war, the debt becomes void. Theoretically, yes, but you can't just tell them. You have to show them, make them understand in a way that breaks through the curse's logic. How? Ayana asked desperately. How do we make ghost horses understand federal wildlife protection laws? Mason's mind raced. He was a rancher, not a shaman or a lawyer, but he knew horses. He'd worked with them his entire life, understood their language of movement and behavior. And if these spirit horses were trapped in the past, locked in 1876, the herd, he said suddenly. Do they ever interact with modern horses? Regular living horses? I don't know, Ayana admitted. They've only ever come for the women in my family. I've never seen them interact with anything else. Mason strode to his workbench and grabbed his truck keys. I have 12 horses in the north pasture. Quarter horses, well trained. What if we brought them here? What if we opened the gate and let them run free in front of the spirit herd? I don't follow, Patricia said through the phone's speaker. These ghost horses think freedom is impossible. They think horses are slaves, trapped forever. But my horses, they're not slaves. They work with me because they choose to. I've never broken their spirits, never beaten them. And right now they're loose in 40 acres of pasture, free to roam as they please. Mason's words came faster now. What if we demonstrate that? What if we show the spirit herd that modern horses have the freedom their ancestors died for? Ayana's eyes widened. A living example. Instead of telling them, we show them. Exactly. Huyana's amendment says, return what was stolen, without them knowing it was returned. Horses' freedom was stolen by centuries of domestication. But it's been returned. We just have to prove it in a way the curse recognizes. Patricia's voice came through, cautious but hopeful. It's completely untested. It might not work at all. But it's also the only interpretation of that amendment that makes practical sense. You'd need to make it visceral, undeniable. The spirit horses need to see, smell, and interact with truly free horses. Mason checked his watch. 5:03 a.m., less than an hour until sunrise. Ayana, you stay in the barn. Don't go near them until we try this. Duke, you're with me. Where are you going? Ayana asked. To round up my horses and open a gate these spirit horses never knew existed. He grabbed a flashlight and his ranch coat, but Ayana caught his arm. Mason, why are you helping me? You don't know me. This isn't your problem. Mason thought of Sarah, buried on the hillside overlooking the ranch. He thought of his daughter Rebecca, safe and free to live her own life. He thought of Huyana, making an impossible choice to save her people and damning her daughters in the process. Because someone should have helped your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother find another way, he said simply. Nobody did, so she made the only choice she could see. Maybe we can make a better one. He pushed through the barn door before she could respond. The wall of horses loomed before him, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. They parted slightly to let him through. Whether out of curiosity or contempt, he couldn't tell. The walk to his truck felt like miles. Every step he expected to feel hooves crashing down on him. But the spirit horses remained still, watching, waiting. Mason climbed into his Ford F-350 and started the engine. The sound shattered the eerie silence, and several horses reared up startled. Good, they could be surprised. That meant they weren't all-knowing. That meant they could be taught. He drove toward the north pasture, where his 12 horses were waiting. As he crested the hill, he saw them silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Stella, Maverick, Copper, and the others. His companions for years, animals he'd raised and trained with patience and respect. Tonight, they might save a girl they'd never met from a curse they couldn't possibly understand. Mason cut the fence and swung the gate wide open, pointing toward the barn. Then he did something he'd never done before. He slapped Stella's flank and shouted, "Run! Run free!" and prayed that freedom, real, undeniable, visible freedom, would be enough to break a curse born from its absence. Mason's 12 horses thundered down the hillside toward the barn, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust that caught the first hints of pre-dawn light. Stella led the charge, her chestnut coat rippling with muscle as she ran, not from fear but from pure exhilaration. This was what horses were meant to do: run, choose their own path, live. The spirit herd reacted immediately. Their perfect circle fractured as heads swiveled, ears perked forward, nostrils flared. Mason could see confusion rippling through them like wind through tall grass. These were horses they'd never encountered before. Not cavalry mounts broken by whip and spur, not work animals ground down by labor. These horses moved with confidence, with joy. Mason's truck skidded to a halt near the barn. He jumped out, leaving the door open, and sprinted inside. Ayana stood exactly where he'd left her, clutching Huyana's pouch, her face pale with terror. "It's working," Mason gasped, out of breath. "They're confused. They don't understand what they're seeing." Ayana rushed to the window. Outside, Maverick, a massive grey gelding, had stopped 50 feet from the spirit herd. He wasn't afraid. He approached cautiously, neck arched, performing the ritual greeting that horses had used since before humans existed. The nearest spirit horse, a gaunt mare with eyes like hot coals, stepped forward to meet him. "Oh my God," Ayana breathed. "They're communicating." Patricia's voice crackled through Mason's phone, which he'd left on speaker. "What's happening?" "Mason, report!" "The horses are meeting," Mason said, unable to tear his eyes from the scene. "My horses and the spirit herd. They're, I don't know, talking? Is that possible?" "Horses communicate through body language, scent and sound," Patricia said. "But these aren't normal horses. If they're spirit constructs bound to a curse, they might be capable of more. They might be sharing memories, experiences." Maverick and the spirit mare touched noses. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mare reared back, confusion evident in every line of her body. She turned to the other spirit horses and let out a sound unlike anything Mason had ever heard, part whinny, part something older and wilder. The entire spirit herd erupted into chaos. Horses reared, kicked, spun in circles. Some charged at Mason's horses, but stopped short, as if hitting an invisible barrier. Others galloped away, only to circle back, unable to break from the curse's invisible tether to Ayana. "They're fighting it," Ayana said, wondering creeping into her voice. "The curse. They're trying to process information that contradicts everything they believe." Copper, a rust-colored mare Mason had raised from a foal, trotted boldly into the middle of the spirit herd. She wasn't aggressive, just curious. She moved from horse to horse, touching noses, swishing her tail, demonstrating the casual confidence of an animal that had never known true cruelty from humans. One of the spirit horses, a massive black stallion that seemed to be the herd's leader, approached Copper. He was easily 17 hands high, with scars across his flanks and a look of ancient rage in his eyes. Copper should have been terrified. Instead, she nickered softly and bumped his shoulder with her nose. The stallion froze. Then slowly, almost tentatively, he lowered his head and breathed in Copper's scent. Mason could see the moment something shifted. The stallion's entire posture changed. The aggressive arch of his neck softened, the fury in his eyes dimmed to something more like bewilderment. "It's working," Mason whispered. "They're learning. They're understanding." But Ayana wasn't celebrating. She was staring at her phone, at the time display. 5:31 a.m., sunrise in 31 minutes. "It's not enough," she said flatly. "Look at them. Yes, they're confused, but they're not released. The curse is still active. I can feel it pulling at me, like hooks under my skin. When the sun rises, this all ends the same way." Mason's heart sank as he realized she was right. The spirit horses were confused, even curious, but they hadn't dispersed. They hadn't released their claim on Ayana. The curse's logic hadn't been fully broken. "Patricia," he said urgently, "showing them modern horses isn't enough. What else? What are we missing?" There was a long pause. Mason could hear Patricia typing frantically. The amendment said 3 things. Show them the open gate they never saw. Return what was stolen. And damn it, the third part is too faded. "I can't make it out." Ayana suddenly grabbed the birch bark from where Mason had photographed it. She held it up to the fluorescent light, tilting it at different angles. "There," she said, pointing to a corner. "Those marks. They're not fading. They're intentionally lighter, hidden. What do they say?" Mason demanded. "I don't know. I never learned to read the old script. My grandmother tried to teach me, but I was too young, too stupid. I thought I had more time." Her voice broke. "I thought I'd never need it. Send me another photo," Patricia instructed. "Use the flashlight app directly behind the bark, light shining through. Sometimes you can see details that way." Mason grabbed his flashlight while Ayana held the bark steady. The light penetrated the ancient material, and suddenly new symbols appeared, not written on the surface but embedded in the bark itself, visible only when backlit. He snapped photos and sent them. Got it? Yes, give me a second. Patricia went silent except for the sound of pages turning. Oh no. What? Mason and Ayanna said simultaneously the third requirement. It says, let the one who seeks freedom prove she values it more than blood itself. Let her choose the herd's freedom over her own survival. Only in choosing their liberation over her salvation can the debt transform from curse to blessing. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ayanna's face went white. I don't understand, Mason said, though part of him feared he did. What does that mean? Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. It means Ayanna has to willingly give herself to the transformation, not to pay the debt, but to free the horses. She has to choose their freedom as more important than her own life. Only then does the curse break its own logic. The debt becomes not a payment but a gift, and gifts have no power to bind. That's the same result. Mason shouted. She transforms either way. No, Ayanna said quietly. She was reading the symbols on the bark, her lips moving as she traced meanings she barely understood. It's not the same. If I surrender to pay the debt, I become part of the herd forever, enslaved by the curse just as the horses were enslaved by humans. But if I surrender to free them, choosing their freedom as the highest good, she looked up, tears streaming down her face. The curse has no power over a willing sacrifice made out of love instead of obligation. You're saying you have to choose to transform, but for the right reasons. Mason couldn't believe what he was hearing. That's insane. It's a semantic game. No, Patricia said. It's the difference between slavery and freedom, between being taken and giving. Guyana built in an escape clause, but it required something she probably thought impossible, that one of her descendants would love the horses enough to choose their freedom over her own humanity, not out of guilt or obligation, but genuine care. Ayanna walked to the barn door. Outside, the chaos had settled into an eerie sadness. The spirit horses and Mason's horses stood intermingled now, the two herds merging into one. The black stallion stood at the center, his eyes fixed on the barn. On her, I don't love them, Ayanna said. I've spent my whole life hating them. They took my mother. They haunted my grandmother until she died. They've terrorized my dreams since I was old enough to understand what they meant. Then don't do this, Mason pleaded. There has to be another way. There isn't. Ayanna touched the window glass. Outside, Copper nuzzled the scarred black stallion, and for just a moment, the ancient horse looked almost peaceful. But I'm looking at your horses, Mason, the way you treat them, the respect in their eyes when they look at you. And I'm thinking about what Patricia said, that there are thousands of wild horses now, protected and free. I'm thinking about my mother, trapped in an endless run, neither human nor horse, suffering for a century and a half. She turned to face Mason, and he saw something new in her expression. Not resignation, determination. What if I could end that? Not just for me, but for all of them. Every spirit horse bound to this curse, every woman who's been consumed by it. What if choosing to transform, truly choosing it, for their sake instead of my own survival, breaks the cycle completely? You don't know that it will, Mason argued. No, but I know what happens if I don't. The curse continues. My future daughter faces this same choice. The horses remain trapped in rage and vengeance. Nothing changes. Ayanna clutched the pouch to her chest. Huyana made her choice to save her people. Maybe I need to make mine to save hers. Mason felt helpless. He was a man who solved problems through hard work and practical action. This metaphysical nonsense about curses and willing sacrifices was so far outside his experience that he might as well have been on another planet. There has to be something else we can try, he said desperately. Some other interpretation? There isn't time. Ayanna checked her phone. 3:47 a.m., 15 minutes until sunrise. And even if there were, I can feel it now. The curse isn't just pulling at me anymore. It's showing me things. Memories that aren't mine. My mother's last moments as a human. My grandmother watched her daughter disappear into the herd. Huyana herself, standing before 400 cavalry horses, making a bargain she knew would destroy her family. She moved toward the door, but Mason blocked her path. "Wait. Just wait. Let me think." "There's nothing to think about, Mason. You've already done more than anyone else ever has. You found the amendment. You brought your horses. You gave me a choice I never thought I'd have. The choice to make this mean something, instead of just being a victim." Duke whined and pressed against Ayana's leg. She knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "Good dog. Take care of him, okay?" "Ayana, please." The first ray of sunlight broke over the eastern mountains, turning the sky from deep purple to brilliant orange. The moment it appeared, every horse, spirit and living, turned to face it. The black stallion reared up, his whinny echoing across the ranch like a trumpet call. Ayana's hands began to tremble. "It's starting. I can feel it. The curse is activating." Mason grabbed her shoulders. "Then fight it! Don't give in." "I'm not giving in," Ayana said, and her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I'm choosing. There's a difference." She pulled away from him and walked out into the dawn. The spirit herd parted to let her through, creating a path to the black stallion. Mason's horses stood silent, bearing witness to something they couldn't possibly understand. Ayana stopped in front of the stallion. He towered over her, magnificent and terrible. This close, Mason could see the intelligence in those ancient eyes, and the suffering. "I see you," Ayana said, her voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "I see what was done to you. The bridles and whips, the breaking of your spirits, the theft of your freedom. And I see what you've become, trapped in revenge, unable to move forward." The stallion snorted and steam rose from his nostrils in the cold air. "I'm choosing to transform," Ayana continued. "Not because the debt demands it, not because I have no other choice, but because I choose your freedom. I choose to give you what my ancestor promised, but couldn't deliver. True liberation. Release from this curse. Peace." She reached up and placed her hand on the stallion's scarred neck. The moment she touched him, light exploded from the point of contact, not the harsh white of lightning, but the soft gold of sunrise, and Ayana's transformation began. The golden light spread from Ayana's hand like liquid fire, flowing across the black stallion's body and rippling outward to engulf the entire spirit herd. Mason shielded his eyes against the brilliance, but he couldn't look away. Duke barked frantically, but the dog didn't approach. Some instinct told him this was beyond his protection. Ayana gasped as the transformation took hold. Her legs buckled, and she fell to her knees. The light intensified around her body, and Mason could see her silhouette beginning to change. Her spine arched backward, her neck elongating. This was it. The curse claiming another victim, but something was different. Instead of the agonizing, drawn-out transformation Ayana had described, the light seemed to be fighting against itself. It pulsed and flickered, as if two opposing forces were wrestling for dominance. Ayana cried out, not in pain, but in defiance. "I choose this." She shouted to the sky, to the horses, to the curse itself. "Not because I must, but because I will. Their freedom is worth more than my fear." The moment those words left her lips, everything changed. The golden light exploded outward in a shockwave that knocked Mason off his feet. When he scrambled up, he saw something impossible. The spirit horses weren't just surrounded by light, they were transforming too, but not into monstrous half-human creatures. They were becoming whole. The black stallion's scars began to fade. His gaunt frame filled out with healthy muscle. The rage in his eyes dimmed and then vanished entirely, replaced by something Mason had never seen in the spirit herd before. Peace. One by one, the other horses followed suit. Wounds healed, broken spirits mended. The fury that had defined them for a century and a half simply dissolved. And Ayana, she was still changing, but not into a horse. The light wrapped around her like a cocoon, lifting her off the ground. Her body shifted and reformed, but instead of losing her humanity, she seemed to be gaining something else. Something more. Patricia's voice crackled from Mason's phone, which had fallen in the dirt. "Mason, what's happening?" The curse, I can feel it from here. Something's breaking! She's doing it, Mason breathed, staring in wonder. She's actually breaking the curse. The black stallion reared up on his hind legs, and this time his whinny wasn't a call to arms or a demand for blood. It was a cry of liberation. The other spirit horses joined him, their voices creating a symphony that echoed across the ranch and beyond. A sound that spoke of chains breaking, of prisons opening, of debts forgiven. Ayana's feet touched the ground. The light around her dimmed, but didn't disappear. It settled into her skin like a second heartbeat, visible as a faint golden glow. She stood there, fully human but unmistakably changed. Her eyes reflected the sunrise, with an intensity that seemed otherworldly. Her hair moved, despite the still air, as if caught in an invisible wind. It worked, she whispered, staring at her hands in disbelief. It actually worked. The black stallion approached her, his movements no longer threatening, but reverent. He lowered his massive head and touched his forehead to hers. Images flooded Mason's mind. Not his own memories, but visions shared by the horses themselves. He saw Huyana standing before the cavalry's mounts, saw the bargain being struck, saw generations of women running with the herd. But now he also saw something new. The curse unraveling, thread by thread, its power transforming from chains into wings. When the stallion pulled back, tears were streaming down Ayana's face. "I can hear them," she said in wonder. "All of them, not just thoughts, their hearts. Their joy. They're free. Actually, truly free." The spirit herd began to move. Not in the coordinated, aggressive formation they'd maintained all night, but naturally, playfully. Several younger horses bucked and kicked, testing legs that had been bound by curse logic for generations. Others rolled in the grass, something they'd been unable to do while trapped in their vengeful forms. Mason's horses watched with obvious curiosity. Stella approached a spirit mare that had been particularly aggressive earlier. The two horses sniffed each other, and then, impossibly, the spirit mare whickered with what could only be described as laughter. They took off running together, joined quickly by others from both herds. "They're playing," Mason said, hardly believing his own words. "Spirit horses have been cursed for over a century, and they're playing." Ayana turned to him, and he could see exhaustion battling with exhilaration in her features. The curse didn't just bind them to collect a debt. It bound them to rage, to vengeance, to the worst moments of their ancestors' suffering. By choosing their freedom, genuinely choosing it without being forced, I broke that binding. The debt is paid not through suffering, but through grace. "So you're not going to transform?" Mason asked, hardly daring to hope. "I already did." Ayana held up her hands, and Mason saw the faint golden shimmer beneath her skin. "Just not the way the curse intended. I'm connected to them now, all horses, not just the spirit herd. I can sense them, communicate with them on a level humans normally can't. It's like Huyana's gift was passed down, but perverted by the curse's terms. Now that the curse is broken, the gift exists in its pure form. The sun fully cleared the mountains now, bathing the ranch in morning light. With it came a new sound, the rumble of hoofbeats, but distant. Mason climbed onto his truck's hood for a better view, and his jaw dropped. Horses were coming from every direction. Not spirit horses, but wild mustangs from the Federal Preserve 30 miles east. Ranch horses from neighboring properties. Even a few horses from the riding stable in town, somehow freed from their corrals. They came in groups of 5, 10, 20, converging on the Double H Ranch like pilgrims to a holy site. "What the hell?" Mason muttered. "They feel it," Ayana said, her eyes distant. The curse breaking sent out a wave, not just spiritual, but real. Every horse within 100 miles felt generations of pain lifted. "They're coming to witness, to celebrate." Patricia's voice came through the phone again. "Mason, I'm looking at traffic cameras from the highway. There are horses everywhere, like hundreds of them. They're not attacking anyone, just moving, all in the same direction, toward you." Within 20 minutes, Mason's ranch was surrounded by over 500 horses. His pastures, his driveway, his yard, all filled with horses of every color and breed. They didn't fight or compete for space. They simply stood together, united by something beyond human understanding. The black stallion, the leader of the spirit herd, approached Ayana one final time. She placed both hands on his face, and Mason saw another exchange. Not of images this time, but of something deeper. Understanding, forgiveness, closure. When she stepped back, the stallion reared up one last time. Every horse on the property followed suit, hundreds of them rising on their hind legs in perfect unison, their combined whinny shaking the very ground. Then, as smoothly as they'd arrived, the spirit herd began to fade, not vanishing instantly, but gently, slowly, like fog burning off in the morning sun. The black stallion was the last to go, his eyes locked on Ayana's until the moment he became transparent, and then nothing at all. The curse was gone. Truly, finally gone. Ayana collapsed. Mason rushed forward and caught her before she hit the ground. She was breathing but unconscious, her skin still holding that faint golden glow. Duke ran up and licked her face, whining with concern. "Is she okay?" Patricia demanded through the phone. "Mason!" "She's alive," Mason said, checking her pulse. "Strong and steady. Just exhausted, I think. She just broke a 150-year-old curse. That's got to take a toll." Over the next hour, the gathered horses gradually dispersed. The wild mustangs returned to their preserve. The ranch horses found their way home. Mason's own 12 horses, looking remarkably pleased with themselves, trotted back to the north pasture for their morning grain. By the time Ayana woke up, it was mid-morning. She was lying on Mason's couch, covered with Sarah's old quilt. Duke was curled up at her feet, refusing to leave his post. Mason sat in his recliner, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands as he processed everything he'd witnessed. Did it really happen? Ayana asked groggily. Or did I have a complete psychotic break? It happened. Mason showed her his phone. Patricia had sent him news links from local stations. Unexplained horse migration baffles Montana residents. Hundreds of horses converge on rural ranch, then disperse peacefully. Scientists puzzled by coordinated horse behavior. Ayana sat up slowly, wincing. Everything hurts. You broke a curse. I imagine that's not easy on the body. Mason handed her a glass of water. How do you feel? Besides the pain. She was quiet for a long moment, taking inventory of herself. Light, she finally said. Like I've been carrying a weight my entire life and didn't realize it until it was gone. And she closed her eyes, concentrating. I can still feel them. The horses, not controlling them or anything like that, just aware. Like they're distant relatives I can sense, but don't have to interact with unless we both choose to. That's going to be useful on a ranch. Mason observed with a slight smile. Mason! Ayana's expression turned serious. I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to help me. You could have called the cops, had me arrested for trespassing. Instead, you fought for me, a complete stranger. You weren't a stranger by the end, Mason said gruffly. And besides, what kind of man would I be if I just stood by and watched an 18-year-old girl get consumed by a curse? Most people would have thought I was crazy. I probably should have. But I've lived long enough to know the world is stranger than we like to admit. He stood up and stretched, his back cracking. So what now? You got a family to go back to? Ayana's face fell. My grandmother died 3 months ago. That's when I started running. I have some distant cousins on the reservation, but we're not close. I've been on my own for a while. Mason nodded slowly. He'd been alone too since Sarah passed. The ranch was too big, too quiet for one person. And he wasn't getting any younger. How do you feel about horses? He asked. I have a much better relationship with them now than I did 12 hours ago, Ayana said with a weak smile. Good, because I could use some help around here. I've got 400 acres, 12 horses that seem to really like you, and a dog who's decided you're part of the pack. Mason met her eyes. Pay's not great, but there's a guest house out back. It needs some work, but it's livable. The job comes with room and board, and I'll teach you everything I know about ranching. Ayana's eyes welled with tears. You're offering me a job? After everything I brought to your doorstep? I'm offering you a home, Mason corrected. If you want it. No pressure. But it seems to me you've spent your whole life running from something. Might be time to run towards something instead." She didn't answer with words. She just stood up, crossed the room, and hugged him. Mason, surprised, awkwardly patted her back. Duke barked approvingly. "I'll take that as a yes," Mason said, his voice rough with emotion. Over the following weeks, Ayana settled into life on the Double H Ranch, true to his word. Mason taught her everything: how to mend fences, care for horses, operate the tractor, and manage the business side of ranching. She was a quick learner, and her newfound connection with horses made her a natural. Word spread about the horse whisperer of Montana, a young woman who could calm the most aggressive stallion with a touch, who knew what horses needed before they showed signs of distress, who seemed to speak their language. Neighboring ranchers started calling Mason, asking if Ayana could help with problem horses. She always said yes. Patricia came to visit a month after the curse broke, bringing documentation she'd compiled about Huayna and the spirit herd. Together with Ayana, they worked to preserve the story, not as a curse to be feared, but as a reminder of the price of freedom and the power of choice. "Your ancestor wasn't evil," Patricia told Ayana over dinner one night. "She was desperate and brilliant. She found a way to save her people, and she built in an escape clause that required love to activate. She trusted that someday one of her descendants would care enough about the horses to choose their freedom. She trusted you even though she never knew you." Ayana kept Huyana's pouch, but she added something new to it: a photograph of herself standing with the black stallion in those final moments before he faded. A reminder that curses could be broken, that debts could be transformed, that choosing love over fear could change everything. One evening, as winter approached, Mason and Ayana stood on the porch watching the sunset. The horses grazed peacefully in the pasture, and Duke sprawled at their feet. "Do you ever regret it?" Mason asked. "What you gave up?" "A normal life, freedom from this connection." Ayana considered the question. "I didn't give up freedom. I chose it. There's a difference. In this life," she gestured at the ranch, the horses, the vast Montana sky, "this is more than I ever thought I'd have. I thought I was going to lose everything. Instead, I gained a home, a purpose, and—" She smiled at him. "Something like a family." Mason blinked rapidly, clearing his throat. "Well, good. That's good." They stood in comfortable silence as darkness fell. In the distance, a wild mustang called out, free, untamed, and alive. Ayana smiled, feeling the echo of that call in her own chest. The curse was broken. The debt was paid. And for the first time in 7 generations, a woman descended from Huyana could watch horses run without fear, without guilt, without the weight of inevitable doom. She was free. They were all free. And that freedom, chosen rather than taken, given rather than seized, would last forever. In the barn, tucked safely in its pouch, the birch bark sat silent. The symbols no longer glowed with curse power. But if someone looked closely at the hidden words, the amendment Huyana had added in desperation and hope, they might notice something new. Where the old script had faded, new words had appeared, written in no human hand. The debt is satisfied. The daughter chose well. Let this story be told so others know. Freedom given freely is the only kind worth having. And beneath those words, barely visible, a simple image, a girl and a horse running together toward the dawn. 3 months after the curse broke, the Double H Ranch was buried under 2 feet of fresh Montana snow. Mason stood at his kitchen window, nursing his morning coffee and watching Ayana work with a particularly stubborn gelding named Thunder in the covered arena. Even through the frosted glass, he could see the golden shimmer that occasionally flickered beneath her skin when she connected deeply with a horse, a permanent reminder of the night everything changed. His phone buzzed. Rebecca, his daughter, called from Seattle. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. How's the snow situation?" "Same as every December for the past 30 years, Mason replied, smiling. "Lots of white, a lot of cold, a lot of work." "And how's your new ranch hand working out?" Mason had told Rebecca. About Ayana, though he'd left out the parts about spirit horses and ancient curses. Some things were too complicated to explain over the phone. She's good. Real good, actually. Got away with horses I've never seen before. That's great, Dad. I was worried about you out there alone. Rebecca paused. Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. I got a strange email yesterday from Professor Chen at UC Berkeley. He's researching indigenous oral histories and somehow got my contact info. Said he heard about unusual horse behavior at your ranch back in October and wanted to investigate. Mason's grip tightened on his coffee mug. What did you tell him? Nothing yet. I wanted to check with you first. The whole thing seemed kind of random, but he was very persistent. Even offered to pay for an interview. Tell him no, Mason said firmly. We don't need anyone poking around here. After he hung up, Mason pulled on his coat and boots and headed out to the arena. Ayana had finished with Thunder and was documenting her progress in a worn leather journal, another new addition to her routine. She'd started recording every interaction with horses, cataloging what she learned through her heightened senses. We might have a problem, Mason said, closing the arena door behind him. Ayana looked up, immediately reading the tension in his posture. Over the past 3 months, they'd developed an easy shorthand, almost like the connection she had with horses. What kind of problem? Someone's asking questions. A professor from California. Rebecca said he's researching what happened in October. The color drained from Ayana's face. How much does he know? Not sure, but if he's asking questions, others might be too. We were lucky the news cycle moved on quickly, but 500 horses converging on one ranch isn't something people forget. Ayana closed her journal and leaned against the arena fence. I've been feeling something lately, not dangerous exactly, but watching, like there are eyes on us that shouldn't be there. This was new. Horse senses or human intuition? Both, maybe. It's hard to explain. Ever since the curse broke, I'm more aware of disruptions in the natural order, and lately something feels off. Before Mason could respond, Duke started barking frantically from the main house. Not his usual alert bark, but something higher pitched. Fearful, they both ran. Inside, Duke was standing at the living room window, hackles raised, growling at something outside. Mason looked, but saw only snow-covered pastures and empty driveway. No vehicles, no people, nothing obviously wrong. But Ayana's eyes went wide. There, she whispered, pointing at the tree line 200 yards away. Mason squinted. At first he saw nothing, then movement. A figure, barely visible against the snow and shadows. Watching, then another figure, and another. At least 6. People spread out along the forest edge, all focused on the ranch house. Who the hell? Mason reached for his phone. Wait. Ayana grabbed his arm. Look at how they're standing. That's not random. That's a formation. They're working together. She was right. The figures maintained perfect spacing, moving in synchronized patterns that seemed almost military. But they weren't dressed like soldiers or law enforcement. From what Mason could make out through the snow, they wore ordinary winter clothes. Jeans, heavy coats, hiking boots. I'm calling Sheriff Brooks, Mason said. And tell him what? That people are standing in the woods? Ayana's expression was grim. They're not on your property. They're not threatening us. Technically, they're not doing anything illegal. One of the figures raised something to their face. Binoculars or a camera, Mason couldn't tell which. The surveillance was deliberate, unmistakable. Thunder whinnied from the arena, and suddenly all 12 of Mason's horses began calling out in alarm. Ayana's head snapped toward the sound, her eyes unfocusing in that way Mason had learned meant she was listening with more than just her ears. They brought horses, she said urgently, 3 of them hidden in the trees, and those horses are terrified. Whoever these people are, they don't treat animals well. Mason made a decision. He grabbed his rifle from the gun cabinet, not to shoot, but to make a point. Then he strode out onto the front porch, the weapon clearly visible in his hands. "This is private property," he shouted across the snow. "State your business or move along." The figures didn't move, didn't respond. They just kept watching. "I'm serious. I will call law enforcement." Still nothing. Then one of the figures, a woman by her build, raised her hand in what might have been a wave or a signal. As one, all 6 figures turned and melted back into the forest, disappearing as smoothly as they'd appeared. Mason lowered the rifle, his heart pounding. What the hell was that? Ayana joined him on the porch, her breath creating clouds in the frigid air. "I don't know, but I know they'll be back, and next time they might not stay in the trees." She was right to be worried. Over the next week, evidence of surveillance mounted. Tire tracks in the snow at the property's edge, always fresh, always from different vehicles. A drone spotted hovering over the north pasture until Mason shot it down with his rifle. Strange calls on the ranch's landline. No one speaking, just breathing and background noise that sounded like traffic. Ayana became increasingly jumpy. She moved her few belongings from the guest house into the main ranch house, taking the spare bedroom on the 2nd floor. Mason didn't object. Whatever was happening, they were safer together. Patricia called one evening, her voice tight with concern. "Mason, I've been contacted by 3 different organizations in the past week, all of them asking about indigenous spiritual practices, all of them asking specifically about horse-related ceremonies in Montana. This isn't a coincidence." "Who are they?" Mason demanded. One claimed to be a documentary film crew. Another was supposedly a cultural preservation non-profit. The third wouldn't identify themselves at all, just said they were independent researchers. I didn't tell them anything. But Mason, if they found me, they can find you. They might already have. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He sat in his recliner, rifle across his lap, watching the snow fall outside. Around 2 a.m., Duke's ears perked up. The dog stared at the front door but didn't bark. "What is it, boy?" Mason whispered. A soft knock at the door. 3 taps, rhythmic and deliberate. Mason stood slowly, keeping the rifle ready. "Who's there?" "My name is Marcus Winters," a male voice called through the door. Deep, educated, careful. "I know it's late, but I need to speak with Ayana. It's about her family, about what happened in October." Ayana appeared at the top of the stairs, fully dressed despite the hour. She'd heard everything. Her expression was hard, resigned. "I knew this would happen eventually." "You know him?" Mason asked. "No, but I know people like him." She descended the stairs. "They always find us. The curse breakers, the relic hunters, the people who think indigenous magic is something they can study, bottle, and sell." "I'm not here to hurt anyone," Marcus called through the door. "I just want to talk. 5 minutes. Then I'll leave if you want me to." Mason looked at Ayana. She nodded slowly. "Might as well find out what he wants, but keep the rifle visible." Mason opened the door, weapon prominently displayed. The man, on his porch, was in his 40s, tall and lean, with sharp features and wire-rimmed glasses fogged from the cold. He wore an expensive winter coat and carried a leather messenger bag. Despite the late hour and freezing temperature, he looked completely composed. "Thank you for opening the door," Marcus said. "I know how this looks. A strange man appeared in the middle of the night. But I've been watching your ranch for a week, and this is the first time I've been alone. My associates don't know I'm here." "Your associates," Mason repeated. "The ones who've been spying on us?" "Yes, and I'm here to warn you about them." Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the empty driveway. "May I come in? What I have to say, you don't want to be overheard." Against his better judgment, Mason stepped aside. Marcus entered, carefully keeping his hands visible and his movements slow. Duke growled low in his throat but didn't attack. In the living room, Marcus set his bag down and removed his glasses to wipe away the fog. My name is Marcus Winters. I'm a researcher specializing in what I call residual spiritual phenomena, events that leave lasting metaphysical imprints on physical locations. 3 months ago, something happened here that registered on equipment I have monitoring unusual energy patterns across the western United States. The spike was enormous, unprecedented. So I came to investigate. And brought friends, Ayana said coldly. What kind of equipment? Mason demanded. Marcus pulled a small device from his bag. It looked like a modified Geiger counter with additional displays and sensors. This measures fluctuations in what some call life force, others call chi, or spiritual energy. Near Ayana, it goes haywire. Here, look! He activated the device and pointed it at Ayana. Immediately, the readout spiked, and a high-pitched tone filled the room. Ayana flinched, and the tone intensified. "Stop it," she said. "That hurts." Marcus immediately powered down the device. "I'm sorry, but you see the problem. You're a beacon, and you've attracted attention from people far less scrupulous than me. What do they want?" Ayana asked, though Mason could see she already suspected the answer. "Depends on the group. Some want to study you, figure out how you broke the curse so they can replicate it for other curses. Some think your blood or tissue might have special properties now, metaphysical antibodies to spiritual afflictions. And some," Marcus's expression darkened, "some think you can be weaponized." Weaponized? Mason's hand tightened on his rifle. "What the hell does that mean?" "Your connection to horses isn't just spiritual, it's functional. You can influence them, calm them, communicate with them in ways that bypass normal animal behavior. Imagine what certain organizations could do with that ability. Military applications, agricultural control, even terrorist scenarios involving stampedes in populated areas." Marcus leaned forward. "Ayana, you're not just a curiosity. You're potentially the most valuable asset in a field that most people don't even know exists." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock Sarah had loved. Ayana's face had gone pale, her hands trembling slightly. "So what do you want?" she finally asked. "To help you disappear," Marcus said simply. "I have resources. Safe houses, falsified documents, contacts who can make someone vanish from all electronic records. If you want to escape this attention, I can make it happen. But you'd need to leave tonight. Within hours, the other groups will realize I broke ranks, and they'll move faster. Why would you help me?" Ayana's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What do you get out of it?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Peace of mind, I suppose. I've spent 20 years studying phenomena like yours, and I've seen too many gifted individuals get exploited, experimented on, or worse. I got into this field because I was fascinated by the unexplained. Now I spend most of my time trying to protect people from others like me. Call it penance." Mason studied the man carefully. His instincts, honed by decades of evaluating livestock buyers and feed salesmen, told him Marcus was being genuine. But genuine didn't mean trustworthy. "How do we know this isn't a trap?" Mason asked. "How do we know you're not just trying to get her isolated so you can do whatever you want?" "You don't," Marcus admitted. "But consider your alternatives. Stay here, and within days you'll have multiple groups converging on this ranch. They'll bring lawyers, court orders, possibly federal agents on false pretenses. Or you can run on your own, without resources or protection, and hope they don't track you down. Those are your options if you don't trust me." Ayana stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered pastures. "I just found a home. I just stopped running. And now I have to run again? I'm sorry," Marcus said, and he sounded like he meant it. Breaking that curse was a miracle, but miracles have consequences. The spiritual world noticed what you did. So did everyone watching the spiritual world. "There has to be another way," Mason said. "We can fight this legally. Get restraining orders, trespassing charges." "Against whom?" Marcus interrupted. "You don't know who all the players are. Some are legitimate research institutions. Others are private collectors. A few are fronts for intelligence agencies. You can't fight what you can't see, and these people are very good at staying invisible until they're ready to move." Duke suddenly jumped up and ran to the back door, barking urgently. Through the kitchen windows, Mason saw lights, multiple vehicles coming up the service road that accessed the north pasture. They weren't supposed to know about that road. It wasn't on any maps. "They're here," Marcus said, his face grim. "I told you, they were watching me, waiting to see if I'd make contact. They followed me." Mason counted at least 4 sets of headlights, maybe more. "How many people are we talking about?" 15, maybe 20. 2 different organizations, possibly 3. This is going to get complicated very quickly. Ayana's eyes had gone distant again, that look Mason recognized as her connecting with the horses. "They have tranquilizer guns. I can feel the horses' fear. They're planning to sedate me, take me by force if necessary." Mason made a decision. He'd faced down plenty of threats in his 68 years. Rustlers, predators, even a meth lab operation that tried to set up on the edge of his property. But he'd never had to protect someone from multiple organized groups with unknown resources and legal cover. "Ayana, go to the barn," he said calmly. "Get the horses ready. We might need them. Marcus, I'm going to give you exactly 1 chance to prove you're on our side. Help me slow these people down." Marcus nodded sharply and pulled out his phone. "I can buy you maybe 10 minutes. But then we all need to run. Deal?" "Deal." As Ayana sprinted toward the barn through the snow, Duke at her heels, and Mason took up a defensive position by the front door, he reflected on how drastically his quiet retirement had changed. 3 months ago, his biggest worry was whether he had enough hay stored for winter. Now he was preparing to defend a teenager with supernatural abilities from what amounted to a covert invasion of his property. The first vehicle crested the hill, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. Behind it came others, forming a convoy that surrounded the main house in a matter of minutes. Mason pumped around into his shotgun's chamber, a warning, not a threat. But his hands were steady, and his aim was true. Whatever came next, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else in his life, head-on, with stubborn determination and the absolute refusal to let anyone take what was his to protect. The winter storm was just beginning, and it had nothing to do with snow. The convoy vehicles formed a semicircle around Mason's house, their headlights creating a harsh, artificial daylight that turned the falling snow into a storm of white static. Mason counted 6 SUVs, expensive models, the kind that cost more than most people's annual salary. These weren't amateurs or curiosity seekers. These were professionals with serious funding. Marcus stood beside him on the porch, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Mandarin. When he hung up, his expression was grave. "I bought us for maybe 5 minutes. I told them the FBI is en route investigating unauthorized research on sovereign tribal lands. It's a bluff. The FBI isn't coming, but it might make them hesitate." "Might?" Mason's finger stayed near his shotgun's trigger. These people didn't drive through a blizzard at 3 in the morning because they're cautious. They're desperate. Whatever readings they're getting from Ayana, it's making them throw protocol out the window. The passenger door of the lead SUV opened. A woman emerged, mid-50s, silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a charcoal business suit completely inappropriate for a Montana winter. She approached the porch with absolute confidence, as if she owned the place. "Mr. Hartwell," she called out, her voice cutting through the wind. "My name is Dr. Vivian Chen. I'm not here to cause trouble. I simply need to speak with your ward about a matter of mutual benefit." "She's not my ward, and it's 3 in the morning, Mason shouted back. "Whatever you're selling, we're not buying. Leave my property." "I'm afraid I can't do that." Dr. Chen stopped 20 feet from the porch. "Close enough to talk without shouting, but far enough to stay out of shotgun range." "Smart. The young woman living here, Ayana, she's in possession of knowledge and abilities that could help countless people suffering from hereditary curses and spiritual afflictions. Surely you understand the ethical obligation to share such gifts." "The only thing I understand is trespassing laws," Mason replied. "You've got 10 seconds to get back in your vehicle." "Mr. Hartwell, I have a court order." "From what judge?" "At 3 in the morning? On what grounds?" Mason's years of dealing with lawyers and bureaucrats had taught him to recognize bluffs. "You've got nothing legal, or you would have led with it instead of sneaking onto my property like thieves." Dr. Chen's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "We can make this difficult. We have connections at the federal level. Department of Agriculture, Bureau of Land Management, EPA. We can bury you in inspections and citations until this ranch is bankrupt. Or you can cooperate, and we can make this worth your while financially." "You threatening me, lady?" "I'm offering options." Dr. Chen gestured to the convoy. "We have 18 people here, Mr. Hartwell. Security personnel, medical staff, legal representation. You're one man with a shotgun. Be reasonable." From the barn, a sound erupted that made everyone freeze. A collective whinny from multiple horses, so perfectly synchronized it sounded like a single voice. But it wasn't just Mason's 12 horses. The sound was multiplied, echoed, as if hundreds of horses were calling out in unison. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. "What is that?" Marcus smiled grimly. "That's what happens when you threaten someone who can communicate with every horse within a 100-mile radius. You're about to learn why this was a very bad idea." The tree line exploded with movement. Horses poured out of the forest. Wild mustangs from the federal preserve, ranch horses from neighboring properties, even the 3 horses Dr. Chen's people had brought hidden in trailers. They came in a tide of muscle and fury, responding to a call that existed beyond human hearing. Within 60 seconds, the Double H Ranch was surrounded by over 200 horses. They formed concentric circles around the convoy, effectively trapping the vehicles and their occupants. The horses weren't attacking, but their message was clear: leave or face the consequences. Several of Dr. Chen's security personnel reached for their tranquilizer guns. Mason raised his shotgun. "I wouldn't. Those horses aren't under anyone's control right now, except their own anger. You start shooting, they'll panic, and panicked horses kill people real easy." Ayana emerged from the barn, walking calmly through the sea of horses, as if she were Moses parting the Red Sea. The animals moved aside for her, their agitation settling wherever she passed. She looked different than she had months ago, more confident, more centered. The golden shimmer beneath her skin was visible now, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She stopped at the edge of the porch, facing Dr. Chen directly. "You want to know about breaking curses? You want to study me, measure me, figure out how to replicate what I did?" Her voice was steady, powerful. "Here's what you need to understand. I didn't break the curse through technique or knowledge or some secret formula. I broke it by choosing love over fear, freedom over survival. That's not something you can bottle or weaponize or teach in a laboratory." "Nevertheless," Dr. Chen began, but Ayana cut her off. "I'm not finished. My ancestor made a terrible bargain that saved her people but cursed her daughters. I unmade that bargain by offering the same thing she did, myself, but for a better reason. That's the secret, Dr. Chen. Curses break when love overrides the original wound. You can't force that. You can't manufacture it. And you sure as hell can't extract it from my blood or tissue samples." One of the security personnel, a large man with military bearing, stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, we have authorization to use necessary force," the horses screamed. As 200 animals reared up on their hind legs, and the sound was apocalyptic. The security man stumbled backward, fear breaking through his professional composure. "Stand down, Richards," Dr. Chen ordered, though her own voice shook slightly. Everyone stand down. But the circle was tightening now, the horses moving closer to the vehicles in coordinated waves. Mason could see panic spreading through Dr. Chen's people. They were trapped, and they knew it. Then a new sound cut through the chaos: sirens. Red and blue lights appeared on the main road, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Sheriff Brooks had arrived, along with what looked like half the county's law enforcement. Marcus smiled. "I lied about the FBI, but I did call the sheriff 15 minutes ago. Told him there was an armed assault in progress at your ranch." Sheriff Brooks stepped out of his cruiser, taking in the scene, the convoy, the hundreds of horses, the standoff. He was in his late 50s, a practical man who'd known Mason for 30 years. He surveyed the chaos and made a decision. "Dr. Chen," he called out, his hand resting on his service weapon. I'm going to need you and your people to exit those vehicles slowly and explain what you're doing on private property at 3 in the morning without permission or a valid warrant. Sheriff, this is a federal matter. Then where's your federal identification? Your court orders? Your authorization to operate in my county? Brooks walked closer, flanked by 3 deputies. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like attempted kidnapping, trespassing, and about 6 other charges I can think of off the top of my head. Dr. Chen's composure finally cracked completely. You don't understand what you're interfering with. The potential applications alone. I understand a man's right to defend his property and the people on it, Brooks interrupted. Now you've got 2 choices. You can leave peacefully right now, or I can arrest all 18 of you and let the courts sort it out. Your call. For a long moment, Dr. Chen stood rigid with frustration. Then she turned sharply and walked back to her vehicle. This isn't over. We'll be back with proper authorization. You do that, Mason called after her. And I'll have my lawyer waiting. The convoy reversed out slowly, carefully navigating around the horses that had begun to disperse as quickly as they'd arrived. Within 10 minutes, the only evidence of the confrontation was tire tracks in the snow and the lingering adrenaline in Mason's chest. Sheriff Brooks approached the porch, shaking his head. Mason, you want to tell me what the hell that was about? Marcus here gave me some story about researchers trying to kidnap your ranch hand. But those horses, I've never seen anything like that in 40 years of living in Montana. Long story. Jim, really long. Mason lowered his shotgun finally. How about I make some coffee and we talk inside? Over the next hour, Mason and Ayanna explained everything to Sheriff Brooks. The curse, the breaking of it, the attention it had attracted. To his credit, Brooks listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from skepticism to thoughtful consideration. This is way above my pay grade, he finally said. But I believe you. God knows I've seen stranger things in these mountains. The question is, what do we do about it? Dr. Chen wasn't bluffing about coming back with authorization. People with her kind of resources, they don't give up easily. That's why Ayanna needs to disappear, Marcus said. At least for a while. Let the attention die down. Let these organizations move on to other projects. I'm not running again, Ayanna said firmly. I ran for 3 months before I came here, and it solved nothing. Running is how you lose yourself. I won't do it. Then what's your alternative? Marcus asked. Stay here and wait for them to come back with lawyers, court orders, maybe federal agents? Ayanna stood and walked to the window, watching the sun begin to rise over the snow-covered ranch. The horses, Mason's 12 plus a few wild mustangs that had decided to stick around, grazed peacefully in the pasture. It looked like any other winter morning on a Montana ranch, peaceful and ordinary, except everything had changed. I go public, she finally said. Tell my story, all of it. Put it out there before they can control the narrative or make me disappear quietly. That's dangerous, Marcus warned. You'll become even more visible, attract even more attention. Good. Let them come in daylight in front of cameras and witnesses. Let them try to kidnap or exploit someone who's already told the world her story. Ayanna turned back to face them. My grandmother used to say that secrets give curses power. Maybe the same is true for the people who want to use me. Take away the secrecy and I take away their leverage. Mason considered this. It was bold, maybe reckless, but it had a certain logic. You'd need help. Media contacts, legal protection, security. I can provide all of that, Marcus said slowly. I have connections with journalists who cover paranormal phenomena seriously, lawyers who specialize in protecting indigenous rights, even security consultants who work with high-profile targets. If you're serious about this, I can make the calls, and I can provide local support, Sheriff Brooks added. Station a deputy here full-time. Make sure anyone coming onto this property has legitimate business and follows the law. It's not perfect protection, but it's something. Patricia, who'd been listening on speakerphone this entire time, spoke up. I can handle the academic angle. Document everything properly. Get it peer-reviewed and published in legitimate journals. Make this scholarly record, not just tabloid fodder. Ayana looked at each of them in turn. Marcus, the researcher who'd changed sides. Sheriff Brooks, the lawman willing to bend rules to protect what was right. Patricia, the academic who believed in things she couldn't measure. And Mason, the stubborn rancher who'd taken in a stranger and changed both their lives forever. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it. Let's tell the story." Over the next 3 weeks, they orchestrated what Marcus called strategic exposure. Patricia published a detailed academic paper on the breaking of generational curses, using Ayana's story as a case study. Marcus arranged interviews with carefully selected journalists, people who would treat the story respectfully rather than sensationally. Sheriff Brooks ensured that every interview, every meeting was documented and witnessed. The story went viral, not in the way Dr. Chen would have wanted, controlled, clinical, exploitable, but as a human interest piece about heritage, sacrifice, and redemption. News outlets picked it up. Indigenous rights organizations celebrated it. Even some mainstream media covered it seriously. Ayana became a minor celebrity, but on her own terms. She did interviews from the ranch, always with Mason present, always making clear she wasn't available for study or experimentation. She shared her story, but kept her boundaries firm. Dr. Chen did return 3 weeks later with lawyers and federal warrants, but by then the story was too public to suppress. Attempts to forcibly examine Ayana would have created a PR nightmare. The Department of Justice got involved, and suddenly what had been aggressive research became a careful negotiation. The final agreement, worked out by lawyers over 2 months of tense discussions, gave Ayana autonomy over her own body and abilities, while requiring her to consult on 5 curse-breaking cases per year as a humanitarian service. She could choose which cases could decline at any time and would be compensated fairly for her time. It wasn't perfect, but it protected her while acknowledging that her abilities could help others. Spring came to Montana with the sudden warmth that always surprised newcomers and delighted longtime residents. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. Mason's horses shed their winter coats and grew sleek and fat on the new growth. Ayana sat on the porch railing one April morning, watching the sunrise and sipping coffee. Mason joined her, his joints creaking less now that the cold had broken. "First case consultation is next week," she said. "Family in Oregon. 7-generation curse involving water. Every firstborn son drowns before his 30th birthday. They're in the 6th generation now, and the current son just turned 28. You think you can help them? I don't know. Every curse is different, but I can try." She smiled at him. "Think you can handle the ranch alone for a few days?" "Managed for 30 years before you showed up," Mason said with mock gruffness. "I think I'll survive." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the horses graze. Duke sprawled at their feet, content. In the distance, a wild Mustang appeared at the tree line. One of the regulars now, a young mare who liked to visit and run with Mason's horses before vanishing back into the wilderness. "Do you ever regret it?" Mason asked. "Going public? Agreeing to help with other curses? You could have taken Marcus's offer, disappeared, lived a normal life." Ayana considered this, her coffee mug warm in her hands. "I thought I wanted normal. I ran toward it for 18 years, tried to pretend I was just a regular girl who'd have a regular life. But the curse taught me something important. Normal isn't about being ordinary. It's about being free to choose your own path. And I'm choosing this. Helping people break free. There's a difference." She glanced at him. "What about you? Ever regret taking in a strange girl who brought spirit horses and federal agents to your doorstep?" Mason smiled, the deep creases around his eyes softening. "Not even once. This old ranch needed some life in it again. Sarah would have liked you, I think. She always said the best adventures come from saying yes when caution says no." A truck appeared on the driveway. Rebecca, making her first visit to the ranch since Ayana's story had gone public. She'd been skeptical at first, worried her father had gotten involved in something dangerous. But she'd seen the interviews, read the articles, and finally understood what had happened. Rebecca emerged from the truck, carrying a large box. "I brought lunch," she called out, "and documents. If Ayana's going to be traveling for consultations, she needs proper insurance, business registration, and the whole legal framework. Your daughter's terrifying," Ayana said to Mason. "She sent me a 40-page document about liability waivers last week." "She's a lawyer." "It's what they do." But Mason's voice was warm with pride. Rebecca had thrown herself into helping Ayana establish legitimate legal protections, working pro bono to ensure no one could exploit or endanger her. They ate lunch together on the porch, sandwiches and Patricia's homemade cookies sent from Billings. They talked about ordinary things, weather, horses, the new foals expected in May. For a few hours, it was easy to forget about curses and researchers and the weight of abilities that made Ayana unique. But as afternoon shadows lengthened, a now familiar tingle ran through Ayana's awareness. Horses were approaching, many of them moving with purpose. She stood reaching out with her senses. "What is it?" Mason asked, immediately alert. Ayana smiled. "Not a threat, just visitors." Over the next 10 minutes, horses appeared from every direction. Not hundreds like during the confrontation with Dr. Chen, but maybe 40 or 50. Wild mustangs, ranch horses, even a few that wore expensive tack and had clearly escaped from their show horse stables. They formed a loose circle around the ranch house, calm and expectant. "This happens sometimes now," Ayana explained to Rebecca. "Horses sense when something important is about to occur. They gather to witness. Important like what?" Rebecca asked, slightly nervous. As if in answer, a golden shimmer like heat waves off summer pavement appeared at the tree line. Ayana's breath caught. She'd seen this once before, 3 months ago, when the spirit horses had faded after the curse broke. The black stallion materialized, stepping from forest shadow into sunlight. He looked different now, healthier, more solid, no longer bound by rage and ancient pain. Behind him came others, the spirit herd, or some of them at least. Not the full 150, but maybe 20 horses, walking with dignity and purpose. They weren't coming to claim anyone. They weren't demanding a debt. They were simply visiting. The stallion approached Ayana, and she walked down from the porch to meet him. When she placed her hand on his neck, images flooded her mind, not of past trauma, but of gratitude. The spirit horses wanted her to know they were finally resting. Some had moved on entirely to whatever waited beyond. Others, like the stallion, remained connected to the physical world by choice rather than curse, watching over the wild herds and occasionally checking on the woman who'd freed them. "Thank you," Ayana whispered, "for trusting me, for letting me break what my ancestor built." The stallion lowered his head, touching his forehead to hers one last time. Then he and his herd turned and walked back toward the trees, fading gradually until they were gone, not vanished, just returned to wherever they existed now. The living horses remained a while longer, as if paying respects, then gradually dispersed back to their territories and homes. Rebecca stared, speechless. Mason just shook his head in wonder. Even after witnessing everything that had happened, the sight of spirit horses visiting in broad daylight was something extraordinary. "Okay," Rebecca finally managed. "I'm going to need to add a clause to your insurance about supernatural visitations. That's definitely not covered under standard liability." They all laughed, the tension breaking. Duke barked happily, running circles in the grass. As evening approached and Rebecca prepared to drive back to town, she pulled Ayana aside. "Thank you for taking care of my dad. I worry about him out here alone. He's the one taking care of me," Ayana replied. "I was running, broken, terrified. He gave me a home and a reason to stop running. I should be thanking you for raising someone that stubborn and kind." Rebecca smiled. "He learned that from my mom. She always said the Hartwell family specialty was taking in strays. Broken horses, wounded animals, lost souls. Yes, that includes curse-breaking teenagers now." After Rebecca left, Mason and Ayana did evening chores together. Feeding horses, checking fences, the ordinary rhythm of ranch life. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Mason paused to appreciate the moment. 5 months ago, he'd been a lonely widower counting down to retirement. His ranch too quiet and his purpose uncertain. Now his property was the headquarters for a curse-breaking consultant, a waypoint for spirit horses, and home to a young woman who'd become like a daughter to him. Life, he reflected, had a strange way of giving you what you needed exactly when you'd stopped looking for it. Mason, Ayana called from the barn. We've got a mare in the north pasture acting strange. I think she might be going into early labor. Coming! Mason grabbed his veterinary kit and headed toward the barn, Duke trotting beside him. Behind him, the ranch house lights glowed warm against the gathering darkness. Above, stars began to appear in the Montana sky, and somewhere in the mountains, wild horses ran free, no longer bound by curses or human cruelty, just living as horses were meant to live. The debt was paid, the curse was broken, and the Double H Ranch had become something more than just a place to raise livestock and wait for winter. It had become a sanctuary for second chances, a proving ground for miracles, and a home for those brave enough to choose freedom over fear. And that, Mason thought as he hurried to help with the laboring mare, was exactly what Sarah would have wanted. The story that had begun with breathing in a barn at 3 a.m., with terror and horses and an impossible choice, had transformed into something beautiful. Not an ending, but a beginning, and the horses, both living and spirit, would always remember. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.